What's a horrifying slash creepy experience you have lived through? Serious. When I was around 19 or 20, I had a close call on my way home from work one night. There was no actual accident, but the scare shook me up enough that I pulled over onto the shoulder to calm down before continuing my drive. Out of nowhere, a windowless van pulled up behind me, and a man got out and walked up to my car. He asked if I was okay, and I told him I was fine, just taking a moment after a bit of scare. He then offered for me to wait in his van with his wife and kids. He insisted multiple times that I get in. Thankfully, my door was locked, and I'd only cracked the window enough to speak with him. What made me uneasy was that his van was parked right behind me, and when I looked in my rearview mirror, I saw there were no passengers inside. I knew something was off, and I'm just thankful I trusted my instincts. I was visiting my girlfriend at her townhouse one night. They had a backyard that shared a fence with another property where a family, or perhaps a group of families, lived. It was a dark night, but the kind where the town's lights reflect off the clouds, creating an unsettlingly bright ambient glow. The fence separating the townhome's yard from the other property was old and dilapidated, with gaps you could see through if you concentrated. Suddenly, a blood-curdling scream ripped through the quiet. No, it was followed immediately by a deep, soul-crushing inhale. The glass sliding door we were standing near was probably 50 feet from the fence. Their floodlights were on, casting stark silhouettes of the parents, their bodies shaking with sobs. Peering through the narrow gaps in the fence, 50 feet away, you could just make out a body swaying gently from a tree. Their son had hanged himself, and they had discovered him in the dead of night when their dog ran out to the backyard, triggering the motion sensor floodlights. All we could see were fragmented views through the small openings in the fence and the distorted shadows of a family experiencing unimaginable horror in real time. Even now, the memory sends shivers down my spine. When I was 19, I was 7 months pregnant with my first daughter, still living with my parents. One night, I came home from work around 11:30 p.m. And, as usual, I made sure to check that the cars were locked before heading inside. But that night, something felt different. An overwhelming sense of fear took over me, so much so that I couldn't even bring myself to glance at my parents' vehicles. I hurried inside, my heart racing. About 20 minutes later, there was a knock at the door. A man stood there, urgently telling us that my parents' SUV was on fire and we needed to get out of the house. We called 911 right away. It turned out there was a serial arsonist in our town. When he was eventually caught and confessed, he revealed that he had been watching me as I came home that night. He had been sitting in my parents' SUV, preparing to harm me if I had noticed him. But because I never looked in his direction, he decided to leave without taking action. It took years for me to feel safe enough to be out at night alone again. When I was in high school, I was home alone for the weekend, which was pretty exciting for me since I never really got the house to myself. I had some friends over on Friday night, and we partied hard. By Saturday, it was just me alone with a leftover case of beers and a movie I was planning to watch. I decided that a little hangover wouldn't stop me from having a great night, so I set out to party by myself. Naturally, I ended up drinking way too much, and soon I was feeling pretty hungry. I figured I'd whip up some pasta, so I stumbled into the kitchen, slurring my words, and started cooking while belting out songs like a madman. I was in my own little world, convinced I was the next master chef. Then, in the middle of my drunken kitchen concert, I heard a strange tapping sound. Something caught my eye. One of the metal chains used to pull the blinds on the glass doors was swinging by itself, hitting the door and making that tapping noise. I froze, watching it sway back and forth on its own. But as I stared, I realized it wasn't just that one chain. All 7 sets of blinds in the room had their chains moving, tapping against the glass doors. My hair stood on end, and I slowly backed away from the kitchen as the noise got louder, more frantic. No windows or doors were open, yet the chains kept picking up speed, tapping harder and faster. And then, out of nowhere, I saw it. The DVD case from a movie I was watching slid right off the TV cabinet, on its own. I slurred out a panicked, "Phew, ark that," and bolted for the door, heart racing. As I ran, I noticed the painting next to the front door had been knocked over and was tilted. I gasped. I was officially freaking out, like full-on horror movie mode. I ran outside, barely holding it together. I was so scared, I even wet myself a little. Couldn't help it. This was real. The house was haunted, I was sure of it. There was a ghost, and it didn't like me. As I stood outside, my mind raced, and I realized the stove was still on. I had to go back inside, grab my phone, and get out of there. So, after psyching myself up, I ran back in, turned off the stove, almost losing again, grabbed my phone, the house key, and a few beers, then headed straight for the park to try and call someone. Anyone. Of course, no one picked up. They were all wiped out from the night before. The next thing I remember was being at the park, drinking, and then blacking out. The next morning, I woke up in my bed, not sure if it had all been a dream. But when I walked out into the living room, I saw the pasta still sitting on the counter and the DVD case on the floor. It was real. I had to tell my family that our house was haunted and we might need to move. I went online and started scrolling through Facebook, and that's when I saw the posts. There had been a minor earthquake that night. I felt like an idiot, hungover and embarrassed, but I also realized that was my first earthquake. We don't usually get them where I live. Or at least, we didn't. It was around 8 p.m. when I was driving home from Target, and I started to get this uneasy feeling that the car behind me was following me. At first, I tried to brush it off, but I couldn't shake the thought. So, I decided to take a strange, roundabout route, hoping they'd lose interest. But no matter where I turned, they stayed behind me. Not tailgating, but close enough to make it clear they weren't just going the same way. Eventually, the car behind me turned off, and I let out a sigh of relief. But then, as I turned onto a side street, I spotted another car up ahead. It was idling with its lights off, and as I got closer, the headlights suddenly flicked on. My heart skipped a beat. The same car, or at least another one with the same intent, was following me again. Panic set in. I floored the gas pedal and sped toward the small town police station, doing everything I could to drive fast but safely. When I pulled in the parking lot, I saw the car speed off. My hands were shaking, and my chest was tight as I sat there for a while, trying to calm my racing heart. After a few minutes, I felt my adrenaline start to settle, and I slowly drove home. As soon as I got inside, I just collapsed in tears. That was the closest I've ever come to feeling like I was living in a horror movie. One night during college, I heard a woman screaming for help outside my window. I looked out and saw her standing right by the street. It was a busy, well-lit area in a popular college town, so there didn't seem to be anything immediately threatening her, but the scream was unsettling. After a few minutes of watching, I was about to head downstairs when a car pulled up and 3 guys got out. I could overhear their conversation since it was happening right outside my bedroom. The woman told them that no one was paying attention to her and suggested they try some other apartment. The guys seemed to agree, jumped back into the car, and drove off. A month later, I heard about an apartment being broken into in the same area. 4 people were caught, 1 woman and 3 men. Apparently, the woman had been in the apartment and left the door unlocked, allowing the men to come in and rob the place. It made me think back to that night, and I couldn't help but wonder if what I had witnessed was somehow connected. When I was about 6, my parents dropped me off at a swimming lesson in China over 2 decades ago. The class was packed with students, and I remember feeling completely overwhelmed. I was terrified of the water and didn't want to get in, but the teacher was getting frustrated. Without warning, he just tossed me into the deep end. I still vividly remember the panic I felt as I sank lower and lower, choking and gasping for air. The fear was suffocating. It felt like an eternity before the teacher finally shoved a long pole into the water for me to grab onto, pulling me out. My vision was fading at the edges, and I was consumed by pure terror. For years after that, I was so scared of water touching my face that I struggled with basic things like showering or washing my hair. Every time I had to go under the water, my heart would race, and I'd feel the panic building up, right on the edge of a full-blown anxiety attack. I had to force myself to take deep breaths, scrub as fast as I could, and get out of the water as quickly as possible. It wasn't until I was in my mid-20s, during a family visit, that this memory came up. My grandmother told me something that shocked me. When my grandpa found out what had happened, he was so furious that he called in favors from his army buddies, old revolutionary soldiers from Mao's days. He had them bring in high-ranking government officials to intimidate the swimming school and the teacher, making sure they'd never do something like that again. The campus house I lived in had a pretty messed up history. There had been suicides, previous owners had died there, and the place was ancient. I stayed there alone all summer because of my job in the city, and every single night I'd hear weird noises. At first, I thought it was just one of my 4 roommates making noise, but now I was all alone. Pretty much every night, I'd hear something strange. The very first day I got there, I went upstairs to my room, and the moment I reached the top of the stairs, I heard a door slam downstairs. Over the course of the summer, I heard footsteps, doors creaking, and a bunch of other unsettling sounds. To this day, I'm still convinced, pretty sure there was a squatter who somehow managed to avoid me all summer. There were mornings when I'd wake up to find the front door unlocked, even though I distinctly remembered locking it the night before. I make a point of saying to myself, okay, here, I'm locking the door, and tug it a few times to make sure it was secure. But every morning, it would be wide open. Maintenance would come by sometimes, but when I called them, they'd say they hadn't been there. The creepiest part, though, was the door that led up to the attic. It wasn't a pull-down door, it was a regular one. Sometimes it would be slightly ajar, and I'd pull it shut, but no matter how hard I tried, it wouldn't stay closed. I'd even put a chair in front of it, but it would still be barely open. One weekend, my roommate came back to the house while I was away, and he said he heard a ton of banging noises through the night. Finally, I got fed up and yelled, "If there's anyone squatting here, I literally don't care. You can stay, but let me know you're here and we can set up some simple ground rules. I'm chill." I thought I heard some rustling from the basement, but nothing ever came of it. The funny thing is, if there was a squatter, I probably wouldn't have minded. It was the college's house, so if someone wanted to crash there for the summer, I would have been totally cool with it, so long as they weren't a psychopath. This wasn't exactly horrifying, but definitely creepy. It happened right after the mass shooting in Las Vegas. I was at my sister's house, keeping her company while her husband was out of town, and we had her 2 young kids with us. We were talking about the shooting, discussing how most people probably don't run when a mass shooting starts because real-life gunfire doesn't sound like it does on TV. Just as we were having that conversation, we heard bang, bang, bang. At first, I thought someone was trying to kick in the door. We immediately grabbed the kids and rushed them to the bedroom, hitting the panic button on her security system as quickly as we could. It turned out it wasn't someone trying to break in after all. Someone had shot through her front door. It was one of those moments where the reality of the situation hit you in an instant. We were just talking about gun violence, and then, out of nowhere, we were hearing it. It was a real wake-up call. I was taken by an ex-partner. While I say taken, it began with intense blackmail, death threats against me and my family, having people surveil my home, and telling me specific details about when my family members were home. This escalated to him forcibly taking me and holding me captive in a hotel room for 3 days. During that time, I was beaten, raped, abused, and tortured. He threatened to sell me to a Bulgarian biker gang, where his plan was to turn me into their heroin addict. He had arranged for me to be collected from the hotel the following morning. Thankfully, my family had reported me missing, and in the early hours, the police managed to locate me. I recognized my only opportunity to escape, and I took it. Thankfully, he is now serving a 23-year prison sentence. Those 3 days taught me a great deal about my own resilience. I had a terrible fight with my mom. She pushed me onto a bed and began hitting me relentlessly, using her nails, hands, elbows, everything she could. I was terrified and had to punch her in the face and kick her to get away and run out of the room. I was so scared in that moment that I literally lost control of my bladder. I genuinely thought I was going to die. Even now, I still have nightmares about it. Edit. Wow, this got a lot of attention. I just want to say I'm so sorry that so many of us have gone through similar experiences. I hope you're all doing better now, and I'm sending a big hug to each and every one of you. Please don't lose hope. There are good people in the world. Thank you all for your concern. I'm okay now. I built my own family, one that I chose myself, and it feels good. I truly hope you can all find that for yourselves. By the way, Happy New Year, and please excuse any mistakes in my English. It's not my first language. I'm Chilean. Having lived in a rough part of town, I witnessed a lot of disturbing things, but one incident remains particularly vivid and horrifying. We were on the second floor of the church next door, looking out of a large window at the back. We could see a lineman working on some wires. Suddenly, he grabbed hold of a live wire. His body immediately tensed up, and he started shaking violently, completely unable to release his grip. People on the ground tried desperately to get him down using wooden sticks, but their efforts only caused him to fall, still clutching the live wire. I couldn't see what happened immediately after his fall, but our neighbors later recounted that his clothes were completely burned off and his body was so charred that he was unrecognizable. Wasn't anything supernatural or strange, but I was there with my dad when he passed away. He had sarcoma, a type of cancer, and towards the end, his body simply began to shut down. For the last week of his life, he was in a medically induced coma. My mother made the incredibly difficult decision to withdraw life support after the doctors determined the cancer had spread too far and he wouldn't recover. In that small hospital room, when the time came, it was just my mother, my older sister, four of my dad's closest relatives, a doctor, a nurse, and a woman who was there to perform his last rites. The silence in the room was profound, broken only by our soft crying and the woman's quiet recitation of the religious prayers. I'm not religious, so I'm unsure of the proper term. I watched as my dad's face turned a purplish blue, his body lightly convulsed, and then, within a couple of minutes, it was over. I was 17 at the time, likely in shock and deeply sad, but I didn't anticipate how much that memory would stay with me, even now that I'm 24. For years, my sister had this unsettling premonition that something significant, something bad, would happen to her in 2020. She even had her daughter in 2017 and would often say she had the baby for me, even though I don't have children of my own. Then came 2019. Our father passed away, and their relationship had been strained for a long time. Our mother had also died estranged from her, a painful reality I can only imagine. I, on the other hand, had been the primary caregiver for both of our parents. In 2020, the COVID-19 pandemic hit, and then a horrific event. Her young son was sexually assaulted. That April, my uncle's younger brother, a truly wonderful man, died, leaving us all heartbroken. By June of that year, we started noticing changes in her behavior, subtle at first, then escalating rapidly. Within a week, she began a devastating and shocking downward spiral. I had to take her sons out of her home to ensure their safety. She was in what we now understand was a severe manic episode. Even before this, my sister was incredibly intelligent, but also the most fiercely stubborn person I knew. So, in this heightened state, she was completely resistant to any help. We tried to have her involuntarily committed multiple times, but nothing seemed to work. She was eventually arrested and jailed, and even the police had her committed at one point. We are still trying desperately to help her, but her condition has worsened so drastically that we now fear she may not survive. She lives in a reality completely separate from ours. The most agonizing part of all this? She has documented her entire decline on Facebook since June. Witnessing her deterioration through those posts, seeing her mind unravel in real time, is truly horrifying. It scares me deeply because our brother struggles with similar mental health issues. It's terrifying to see how quickly and completely our own minds can turn against us. A few months ago in June, my boyfriend and I went camping at a remote spot we visited before. The campsites were spread far apart, about 400 feet, with trees blocking the view. There was no cell service, and the nearest ranger station was 30 minutes away. Plus, it was bear country, so I had my bear spray on my hip. However, my boyfriend realized he'd forgotten our gun at home. He didn't see the box with our packed items. So, all we had was the bear spray. We had a peaceful evening and went to sleep with our dog in the tent. My Subaru was parked in front, forming a barrier. Around dawn, I woke up to my boyfriend urgently whispering, "Get the bear spray now." Half asleep, I responded, "Oh shit, is there a bear?" I grabbed my bear spray, a little excited at the prospect of seeing one. But then my boyfriend's next words sent a chill down my spine. "No, it's a person." My boyfriend explained later that he'd woken up to the sound of someone jiggling our tent's door handle. He and the dog exchanged confused glances before he opened the tent zipper to peek outside. The tent was slightly open, and it was still dark. My boyfriend, normally a calm and quiet guy, suddenly yelled, "Get out of here! Go! Get the fuck out of here!" At first, I thought he was yelling at an animal. I had our 40-pound dog in my arms, shaking in fear. I stuck my head out of the tent, and through the dim light, I saw a massive man crouched behind my car trying to hide. My boyfriend kept yelling, but the guy didn't move. He stood up and just stared at us. He was way too close, and there was no one else around. He probably heard us talking about the bear spray, so he knew we didn't have a gun. I quickly stuck my bear spray out of the tent, and in my scariest voice yelled, "Do you want to get bear sprayed? Get off." Miraculously, the guy started to back away slowly, but he still gave off this creepy, confident vibe, like he knew we couldn't stop him if he wanted to attack. My boyfriend is tough, but the guy was huge, at least 6 feet 3 inches and bulky. The man finally started walking away down the road, but my boyfriend and I wasted no time packing everything up. We threw all our gear and the dog into the car, watching the guy stumble down the road. He walked with an unnerving, swaying motion, like he was on something. I'm a nurse, so I've seen a lot of drug-induced behaviors, and I'm pretty sure he was on meth. His strange body language and confrontational attitude screamed, "I'm untouchable." As we finished loading the car, I made a risky mistake. I ran to the end of the campsite to check where the guy had gone, leaving my boyfriend about 20 feet away. Just as I saw him dragging a massive branch behind him, my boyfriend shouted for me to come back. The guy was only 10 feet from me now. I had left the bear spray in the car, and I was unarmed. The man stopped right in front of me, blocking the exit to our campsite. He gave me a chilling, sinister look that still haunts me. Then, without breaking eye contact, he dropped the branch in front of our exit, making it impossible for us to leave unless we moved it. After that, he walked off, cutting through the woods behind our site. Panicked, I grabbed the dog and sprinted back to the car, worried there might be more people hiding in the bushes. We jumped into the car, and my boyfriend cleared the branch out of the way. As we drove off, we saw more branches and logs placed in the road, seemingly to slow us down. It felt more like a delusional attempt to block our way, rather than a real effort. We drove around the debris, and my boyfriend quickly cleared anything in the way. We honked our horn as we passed other campsites, hoping to warn anyone still asleep. Once we were on a main road, we finally got a signal and called 911. They took the description and promised to send an officer, but I wasn't sure they'd do much to catch him. We still don't know who that guy was or what he really wanted. It's possible he was just trying to steal something, though luckily we'd locked up our stuff. But that look he gave me, it still haunts me. Most thieves would run once they're caught, but this guy seemed predatory. My boyfriend and I learned a valuable lesson that day. We'll never forget the gun again. Back in 2016, I was riding my motorcycle at around 45 miles per hour when I lost control and laid it down. As I realized I was about to crash, I had just enough time to think, this isn't going to end well. Everything went black, and the next thing I knew, I was standing in the middle of the road, watching the wreck unfold. I watched my body slam into the pavement, but strangely, I didn't feel any fear or urgency. It was almost as if I wasn't attached to it anymore. Everything around me felt more vivid, more real than anything I'd ever experienced. The colors were brighter, the sounds sharper, like the birds chirping in the most beautiful way imaginable. Everything had this intense clarity except for my body and the bike. They looked different somehow. I can't really explain it. Then I felt a presence, this male energy I couldn't see, but I felt it push me back into my body. Suddenly, I was sitting in a ditch, blood in my eyes, trying to make sense of what had just happened. I slowly wiped the blood away and forced myself to stand up. I had to get help, but I was alone. My bike was too heavy to lift, and I hadn't told anyone where I was going. Looking back, I made so many mistakes that day. I was riding without a license, I didn't wear any gear or a helmet, and I was taking back roads I didn't know. I was careless, and I'll never forget how lucky I was. That experience completely changed my life. I'll never forget the moment my son had an anaphylactic reaction while we were driving down I-285 in Atlanta. Panic set in as I quickly pulled over to the side of the highway, barely able to think straight. I had to administer his EpiPen right there, hoping it would be enough. While still on the side of the road, I called 911, told them I was heading straight to the CHOA, Children's Healthcare of Atlanta, emergency department, and begged them to be ready. Thankfully, we weren't far from the hospital, but in that moment, I've never been more terrified in my entire life. This experience still creeps me out to this day. When I was 15, my mom dropped me off at the library in our town center to meet a friend for a school project. She left to run errands, and I headed inside. As I approached the entrance, I noticed a homeless guy sitting on a nearby bench. Something about him gave me a strange feeling, so I quickly walked past without making eye contact. I went inside to search for a book for the project, and within 2 minutes, my mom unexpectedly showed up. She casually made small talk with me before guiding me through the aisles. Then, she asked me to pretend I was looking for a book on the bottom shelf. I did, feeling a bit uneasy. She leaned in and whispered, "You're being followed by the same homeless guy. And he's not alone." I turned to look, and sure enough, he was pretending to browse, but his eyes were fixed on me. And there was someone else with him, though I couldn't tell if it was another man or a woman. Apparently, my mom had noticed them as she was pulling out of the library parking lot and had made a quick U-turn to come back. I don't remember how we managed to get out of their sight, but we did. Fortunately, my friend couldn't make it that day, or things might have been even stranger. My dad used to wake me up in the middle of the night to confront me about things I hadn't done right or things I hadn't finished. And when that happened, things got bad. My dad had anger issues, and it wasn't long before those late-night confrontations turned dangerous. A couple of times, he actually tried to push me out of my third-story bedroom window, and once he strangled me until I blacked out. I'm pretty sure he knew when to stop, because I wasn't dead. It became so regular that I would wake up on my own before he came to get me, and I couldn't fall back asleep. I'd lie there, heart racing, anxiety creeping in, near tears, just waiting for the next round. When I got to high school, I started fighting back. I yelled at him, pushed him away when he tried to get closer. At first, it made him more violent. One night, he shoved me off the banister of the third-floor staircase. But that was also the same night I grabbed a clothes hanger and threatened to whip him if he laid a hand on me again. That week, I went to school, and my teacher called the police. I was furious at her for getting involved, but looking back, I'm so grateful she did. I'll never be able to thank her enough for what she did. 18 years ago, I was living with a roommate who went away on a trip, leaving me alone in the house. One night, I woke up in the middle of the night, and the room was almost completely dark. As my eyes adjusted, I noticed someone standing in my room. Adrenaline hit me instantly, and I tried to yell out in my toughest voice, "Who are you?" But I was still half asleep, and it came out more like a pirate. "Oh, hurrah." It's funny to think about now, but in that moment, I was absolutely terrified. I quickly rolled over in my double bed, trying to create some distance, and shouted again, "Who are you?" But once again, all that came out was, "Oh, here are." That's when I realized that any attempt to sound tough was out the window. Panic started setting in, but as I woke up a little more, I realized I was yelling at my towel, which I had draped over the back of my computer chair. Now, I laugh about it, but back then, it was absolutely horrifying. I had a stepdad who was deep into drugs, meth and heroin, to be specific. After 6 years of dealing with his addiction and the constant fear that came with it, my mom finally made the decision to leave him when he threatened our lives. We had to go into hiding, get a restraining order, and take every precaution to stay safe. Eventually, we moved in with my Nana, not far from where we had lived before. But even though we were physically away from him, the fear didn't go away. There was nothing more terrifying than seeing a car that looked like his or spotting someone who resembled him at the store. It would freeze me in place, panic flooding through me. Living with him had been awful. Beyond the drugs, he was abusive, and it's something I'll never forget. This experience wasn't anything paranormal, but it was one of the most intense things I've gone through while living with my father, who was a recovering alcoholic. My whole life, he'd struggled with alcohol. He was addicted to hard liquor and had a hard time quitting. He'd often end up in rehab, and during those times, I'd be sent to live with different caretakers, some of whom were abusive. To try and avoid me being sent back to those places, my dad decided to try quitting on his own without rehab. He worked at a Salvation Army, so if he got caught drinking, he could lose his job. He lied about a lot of things, so I never really asked for the details. The first time I witnessed what serious alcohol withdrawals looked like was something I couldn't understand at the time. It was at a Salvation Army event where we were eating with other recovering addicts. My dad couldn't even get the food to his mouth. His hand was shaking so badly. After several attempts, he just gave up and left his food untouched. He was irritable when sober, but this was a whole new level. A few nights later, I woke up to hear him talking to someone outside. He was holding a full conversation, but when I asked who he was talking to, he said it was Carol, our next-door neighbor. I thought he was on the phone, but there was no phone. It was like he was talking to someone who wasn't there. The third stage was the worst. We were sitting outside by the apartment's swimming pool one late night, and my dad was staring up at the trees. I asked, "Do you see them?" He replied, "The bobcats in the trees." He was seriously hallucinating, and it wasn't the only thing he was seeing, but that's the part that stuck with me. The final straw came when he decided to ride my bike to the store one morning. He barely made it 20 feet from the door before he fell, knocking himself out cold on some stairs. I was too scared to go outside. The neighbors helped him, and when he came to, he had no idea what was going on. I was only 15, and I'd never seen my dad act like that or get hurt. He was a brilliant mathematician and electrician, and seeing him go through this was heartbreaking. He was taken to the hospital and stayed there for a while, and I had to stay with a friend. My dad kept drinking after that, and 7 years later, he passed away from liver and kidney failure. I was out at a restaurant with my family when something happened that I'll never forget. My dad, who's usually super calm, was about to eat his usual Cubano sandwich when he suddenly yelled, "Holy shit," and turned pale. I asked what was wrong, and he stammered that some guy had just fallen. I turned around, and there, on the pavement, was a man lying motionless. Without thinking, I bolted out of the restaurant and ran across the street, not even looking for oncoming cars. I'm lucky I didn't get hit. But by the time I reached him, it was too late. He was already gone. Blood was pouring from his mouth, nose, and head. I shouted at him, trying to get a response, but he didn't move. Then, I turned away and called 911. Someone must have already made the call because within moments, a fire truck showed up. They rushed to him, but it was clear it was too late. They covered him with a white sheet. A week later, a detective called me. They'd ruled out suicide, but the man had fallen from the 5th floor around dinner time. It might have been an accident, or it was something more sinister, like a homicide. I saw his face in my mind for weeks, randomly, at odd moments. To this day, I still don't know what happened. I haven't been back to that restaurant since. What still haunts me is that his bloodstains stayed on the pavement for months after, faint but visible. People just walked by it oblivious. The red tape that had clung to the pole was barely hanging on, slowly deteriorating. No one ever left flowers for him. I still wonder if he could hear me yelling, or if he had already been gone by the time I tried to help. A few years ago, I was in a relationship with a girl who, at the start, was overflowing with joy. She'd wake up in the morning, sitting in bed, tears of joy in her eyes because she was certain I was her soulmate. She would talk about our future together, meeting my parents, how lovely they would think she was, and all the little dreams she had, like us getting a pet fish when we moved in together. It felt so real and vivid, like she truly believed in every moment. Then, one day, everything changed. It was as if she woke up and just stopped feeling. It happened so abruptly, almost overnight, without any explanation. There was no conversation about what happened, no desire to explore the shift in her feelings. It was like she didn't even understand it herself. She seemed to accept it without question, almost like she knew it was over and just had to move on. That moment of sudden, unexplainable change still haunts me. The fact that something so powerful and real can fade away so quickly, without warning, within the human experience honestly terrifies me. She was so certain we were meant to be, always looking ahead to our future, right down to the smallest details. And then, nothing. When I was around 13, I had a habit of staying up late on weekends, trying to beat whatever N64 game I was obsessed with at the time. One night, I decided to move my gaming setup into the living room. Now, our house had a hallway that connected to the bedrooms, but it also had a door for some odd reason. So, after setting everything up, I closed the door to the hallway, hoping not to wake anyone up. About 2 hours into my gaming session, I started hearing tapping noises. I paused my game and the noises stopped. But then a few minutes later, the tapping grew louder, this time coming from the sliding glass door in the den. My heart started racing, and I quickly ran to get my dad. He hurried out of his room and went outside to check. He barely made it to the back before we both saw someone jump over the fence and run off. The police arrived shortly after, and we found out that a patient had escaped from a nearby mental hospital earlier that evening. What made it even creepier was that the glass on the sliding door was almost shattered. It was that close to breaking. After that night, I never played video games in the living room again. To this day, I suffer from night terrors and an overwhelming fear of looking out of windows or doors at night. I was hanging out with a friend at a secluded lookout near my town, which you can only reach by driving through some forest and down dirt roads in the hills. We were just enjoying the view when out of nowhere, a car came speeding down the road and blocked us in. The spotlights flashed on, blinding us, and then someone got out of the car holding a chainsaw and started walking toward us. In that moment, all logic went out the window. I hit the gas and floored it. I didn't even look back, just focused on getting out of there. Luckily, I managed to break free and make it to the main highway. The car followed us for a while, but eventually stopped once we hit the open road. A few years ago, I was sound asleep when I suddenly woke up to some strange noises in my room. It's hard to describe, but it sounded like the creaking of furniture when you place something on it, or like the vibrations you'd hear during an earthquake, something like that. The weird part was the sound seemed to be coming from all around me, like something was jumping from one spot to another. I was absolutely terrified and had no idea what was going on. I was too scared to look around, so I just hid under my blanket, trying to ignore it. After what felt like forever, the sounds finally stopped. My heart was still racing, but I managed to gather enough courage to stretch my arm out and grab my phone for the nightstand. When I turned it on, I noticed something odd. There was condensation all over the screen like it had been steamed up. Everything else in the room seemed normal, but that strange sight stuck with me. I had a hard time falling back asleep after that. When I was 10, my group went to an away camp. There were other groups there, but the boys and girls had separate cabins, as you'd expect. One night, me and a few of the other boys decided to sneak over to the girls' cabin and scare them by banging on their windows. We waited until around midnight, making sure to be quiet and not wake the counselors. We rounded the final corner of the cabin and came to a dead stop. There, standing by the window, was a man in a white shirt, probably in his 30s, peering inside. We were absolutely terrified. We thought it might be a ghost or something. In a full panic, we bolted back to our cabins, hearts racing, already spooked from telling each other scary stories earlier. We never got caught sneaking out, and none of us told the counselors because we were too scared of getting into trouble. To this day, I have no idea who the man was or what he was doing there. I can only imagine what would have happened if we hadn't stumbled upon him that night. It was 7th or 8th grade, right after school got out, and it was pouring rain like really heavy. I made my way over to the church parking lot next to the school, where my mom usually picked me up. There were a few other people waiting there for their rides, but my mom's car wasn't in its usual spot. I stood there for a moment, texting her to figure out where she was. That's when a guy caught my attention. He asked if I wanted to hop into his van to stay out of the rain. I didn't recognize him, and there were no kids in the van. Naturally, I declined and told him I was fine. He asked again, and I said no, then started walking away. Just as I did, my mom texted me, letting me know where she was. Looking back, I probably should have done something, maybe told a teacher or gone inside the school, but my mom's car was a good distance away from his van, and I figured he might have already left. I honestly don't know if anything would have happened, but you don't just ask a random kid to get into your van, especially when you don't know them. At the time, I lived in a pretty safe neighborhood. No kids were reported missing, so I guess no one fell for it. The school he was hanging around was a 7th to 12th grade charter school, so there were older kids there too. It wasn't exactly horrifying, just really unsettling. And I still think about it sometimes, wondering if I should have alerted someone that this guy was acting off. One night, someone tried to break into our house. My kids were asleep, and I was doing laundry in the back of the house. As I was moving from one side of the house to the other, I guess someone saw me through the kitchen window. I was in the living room at the front of the house when I started feeling this strange vibration. At first, I thought one of the kids was out of bed, roaming around. I checked on them, but they were both still fast asleep. The vibration kept happening, though, and I realized it was coming from the door. Someone was moving between the back door of the laundry room and the one in my bedroom, pounding and kicking. I panicked. Instead of calling 911, I called my husband. He reminded me we had a gun, but it was in my car, which was parked in the garage, and the garage door was wide open. I was terrified to go out there, but I knew I had to do something. So I grabbed the car keys and ran out to my car. The moment I opened the door and reached for the gun, the guy came around the corner of the house, right in front of the garage. He didn't see the gun, but when I cocked it, he freaked out. He started babbling, saying someone was after him and that he was just trying to hide. I had barely processed what was going on when I realized my husband had already called the cops. They showed up within minutes. There I was, standing there with the gun pointed at this guy. He's lucky the police arrived when they did, and honestly, I'm lucky I was too scared to actually pull the trigger. That night could have ended very differently. Before this, I was totally against having guns in the house. But after what happened, I went out and got my concealed carry license. We also got another gun, one for the house and one for the car. Throughout my childhood, whenever I slept in my parents' room, I had to make sure the closet door was always shut. If it wasn't, I'd see shadowy figures walking through it. They would vanish if I shut my eyes for a moment, but it was still incredibly creepy. Fast forward to high school, when we remodeled our house, and the corner of my room now occupied the spot where that closet door used to be. During my junior year, we got a new dog. This dog would sleep all over the house, except for my room. Whenever he came in at night, he would always stand in the middle of my room, staring at the corner where the closet used to be and whimper. No matter what I did, I couldn't get him to calm down unless I let him out of the room. Around the same time, I started hearing scratching sounds coming from that corner. Some might say it could have been a mouse or a bird, but the scratches were different. They didn't sound like small animals at all. It was almost as if something much larger was making them. The scratching eventually stopped, and I really hope it doesn't come back. I'm probably forgetting some details, but if I remember anything else, I'll add it. I have one more experience to share. After I gave birth to my son via C-section, something went horribly wrong. My nurse forgot to refill my morphine drip in the hours following my surgery. As a result, the pain meds wore off completely, and I was left exposed to the full agony of having my abdomen sliced open. I panicked instantly. The pain was unbearable. I was left lying there helpless while my nurse went to get more medication. It felt like it took forever. In those agonizing moments, the only thing I could think to do was breathe the way I had during natural childbirth, something I'd done before to manage the pain. I focused on my breathing, just trying to keep from passing out. That experience stayed with me for a long time afterward, leaving me deeply traumatized. My father was deployed with the UN. In Sierra Leone during the Civil War, more than 2 decades ago. If you're familiar with the horrors that unfolded there, you can probably imagine the kind of impact it had on a man to witness such atrocities. Growing up, my father wasn't an alcoholic or an addict, but something inside him had broken. He did his best to mask it, but when he was angry, it was a whole different level. I'll never forget one specific moment when I was being a typical 11-year-old, sullen and defiant. He grabbed me by the neck and screamed at me, telling me how he'd taken countless lives in Africa, how he'd seen and killed child soldiers younger than me. He said my life could be taken just as easily for being ungrateful. What stung the most was that, despite the rage, he spoke about these things with a twisted sense of pride. He looked at me and said, "I'm 3 times the man you'll ever be." I still remember the date, February 15th, 2014. At the time, I thought I'd one day prove him wrong. It took me a long time to realize that his words weren't a reflection of me, but of the trauma he'd never been able to face. A few years ago, I made a pretty terrible mistake. I ate some really old herring that had been sitting in vinegar for who knows how long. It didn't taste quite right, but my mom assured me that it was fine and convinced me to eat it anyway. So I did. Hours later, I started feeling dizzy and had to lie down. I thought it was just a temporary thing, so I slept through the night. The next morning, I still didn't feel well, but I tried to power through it, thinking I'd feel better with some rest. But by the time the following day came, I was throwing up, my world spinning as if I'd drunk an entire bottle of vodka. My mom rushed me to the hospital, but it took a while to get there. I was severely dehydrated. I hadn't had a sip of water in over 30 hours. I couldn't stop throwing up, so I was leaning out the car window just to release it as we drove. By that point, my hands and legs were cramping up, and I could barely hold my head up. My neck muscles had given out, so my head just hung loosely out the window. I could hardly speak. I had never felt so sick in my life, and it hit me then. I thought, this is it. I'm going to die. It was the strangest feeling. My brain was oddly calm, as if I had fully accepted that this was the end. Instead of fear, I felt a strange sense of relief, knowing the suffering would soon be over. I just let go and didn't even try to fight it. That's what scares me the most now, the way I just accepted it. Spoiler alert, I survived. We finally made it to the hospital, where they hooked me up to N4 to rehydrate me. I spent the next 4 days throwing up nonstop, but slowly I started to feel better. After a week, they released me, but I was still dizzy for another 2 weeks. I'd stumble when walking, especially after getting out of the shower, when the wet hair would throw me off balance and I'd fall. This isn't really a creepy story, but it's about something far more horrifying: abuse. From the time I was 9 to 14, my dad was married to a woman who verbally and physically abused me, my sister, and even her own daughter. Many people, including my grandma, tried to tell my dad what was happening, but he wouldn't listen to anyone. It's something that still affects me to this day, and I'm 29 years old now. One evening, I was out walking along a river embankment with my girlfriend. It was dark, damp, and we were stargazing when suddenly I looked up and saw a B-2 stealth bomber flying overhead. Now, we weren't in the States, we were in Northern Ireland, so it was a bit unnerving to see the bomber's silhouette against the night sky. It struck me that if I hadn't been looking up at that exact moment, I would have never known that a bomber, possibly returning from a mission and heading west to America, was flying tens of thousands of feet above us. Curious, I reached out to the Ministry of Defense and various British departments, hoping for some kind of confirmation. The response I got was essentially, "We're not saying you saw a B-2, but we're not saying you didn't either. Since we have treaties with the US, we likely don't know what aircraft they might have flown over, so we can't help you." When I was in 4th grade, a transformer mounted on a pole right by the school gate exploded. This was directly above the area where parents waited for their children after school. A corrosive liquid sprayed out and rained down on some of the people, instantly burning their skin. Panic erupted. Students and parents were screaming and running in every direction. As I tried to make my way to the exit, I saw one of the victims. She had suffered horrific burns, seemingly fourth degree, all over her body. Her hair was almost completely gone, her scalp looking melted and raw. She moved like a zombie, her arms outstretched in front of her, struggling to take each step as she called out her daughter's name in a desperate, hoarse voice. She collapsed right in front of me and began to convulse, her body jerking violently before finally becoming still. People were just running past her, seemingly oblivious or unwilling to help or check if she was alive. I stood there, frozen in shock, until my friend grabbed my arm and pulled me away, urging me to get out of there. To this day, the acrid smell of burning skin and chemicals remains vivid in my memory, a horrifying imprint that will likely never fade. When my ex-husband got clean, a fragile hope flickered within me that things would finally be okay. We found a tiny studio apartment in the backyard of some stranger's property, a place riddled with red flags that I chose to ignore, blinded by the relief of his sobriety. That fragile peace didn't last. It started subtly, insidiously. Before I even fully registered what was happening, I was stripped of my autonomy. No phone, no money, no job. I was even forbidden from visiting his workplace just down the street to use the Wi-Fi. My own grandmother, who lived right across the street, became someone I was not allowed to see. It escalated quickly, brutally, into a full-blown captivity where arguments devolved into regular physical violence. He tore up the only photograph I had of my grandfather, a man I deeply admired. He hurt me, and then I witnessed him hurting our infant son. A chilling suspicion lingers that he even attempted to poison him at one point. He split my head open with a remote control. He threw glass at me, leaving my legs cut and bleeding. He wouldn't let me clean the apartment, a deliberate tactic, I believe now, to isolate me, to prevent me from reaching out for help from the police or Child Protective Services. The one time I did call the police, they simply made me leave for the night with nowhere to go, a situation that enraged our landlord, likely because he lacked the proper permits for the illegal backyard dwelling. He refused to buy groceries, and our baby often had to subsist on bottles made from boiled apples and potatoes. That year, I inflicted immense harm upon myself and attempted suicide multiple times. I lost my faith, and my sanity felt like it was slipping away entirely. It wasn't until I finally grabbed my son and the few belongings I could carry and fled to the streets that I was truly done, truly free. Homelessness felt like a liberation compared to being held hostage. Once I finally found some stability, I looked back at the notebooks and drawings I had kept during that horrific time. They were filled with unintelligible ramblings, garbled words, and bizarre nonsense. Reading and seeing those fragments of my past self truly horrified me. My diary entries were just endless justifications for staying, coupled with emotionless logs of terrible events, as if they were unremarkable. I still can't believe I survived that. I don't understand how I made it out. I don't know where he is now, and I never want to know. I've made incredible progress in therapy, working through the crushing guilt I felt about my son's exposure to that environment, the terrifying sleep paralysis, the night terrors, the flashbacks, the disorienting inability to distinguish between waking life and vivid nightmares where I would harm everyone I loved, nightmares that felt like they stretched on for hours. Now, finally, I am happy. I haven't self-harmed since 2014. I don't dwell on the past, and I don't live in constant worry. My son is in first grade now. He's so tall, so polite, and such a joy. He excels in school and is kind to everyone he meets. He sees the world with an innocent wonder that I sometimes lack, and I love him beyond words. Perhaps he truly saved my life countless times because I clung to the will to live for that little boy, knowing he would have suffered something unimaginable without me. I felt so alone, but he was there with me the entire time. I've since had another child and remarried. Life is finally as it should have been all along. I can honestly say I am finally happy. This isn't the most terrifying story, but it's the first thing that came to mind. It happened after school last year. My friend and I usually got pizza before practice. One day, when we went into the pizza place and sat down, we noticed a small group of other guys there. One of them came over and asked if he could be our friend, explaining that he had just moved to the area from another school. We were friendly and said yes, and we all chatted for a bit. He asked if he could sit with us, and we talked a little longer. Eventually, we realized it was time for practice, so we walked back to the high school, which was right next to the small strip mall where the pizza place was located. Practice was normal, and then we went home. The next day, we saw him during lunch and said hi, just like we did whenever we passed each other in the hallways over the next week. Then one day after school, I decided to go straight home instead of getting pizza with my friend, and I took a nap since practice wasn't until 6 p.m., giving me a couple of hours. I woke up to about 6 missed calls and over 50 missed messages from my friends, the cheer group chat, and my coach. I answered the phone when my coach called again, asking, "What's up? What happened? Why is everyone freaking out?" She told me there had been a stabbing at the pizza place my friend and I usually went to every day. I froze instantly. She asked where my friend was, and I said I didn't know because I wasn't with her. She told me to call my friend, so I did, frantically asking where she was. It turned out she wasn't there, and a wave of relief washed over me. I went to practice, and everyone was shaken up by the news. Practice that day was eerily quiet because we had learned that a student from our school had been stabbed. After practice, I went home, and my mom told me the name of the boy who had been stabbed. It was the new kid, the one who had just moved from another town. He passed away that night. For the next few months, the school hallways were almost completely silent. After enduring 10 years in an abusive relationship, I finally left, taking my children with me. The day I left, my ex-husband told me that he would find me, kill me, and take my kids somewhere no one would ever be able to find them. Following warnings from the police that they couldn't guarantee our safety, we fled across the country, more than 3,000 kilometers away. This was after we had already moved 4 times because he always found us. Our new home was in a brand new housing development that wasn't even on the maps or GPS yet. The area was so new that emergency services had to physically map it out. The duplex I was staying in didn't even seem to exist on any records. It was tucked behind another house, accessed through a gate behind a garage. Essentially, we had made it as difficult as possible for him to find us, hoping that being off the radar would offer us some protection. One night, around 10 p.m., I was in the backyard hanging laundry. My child had wet the bed again, and the clothesline was just beside the gate, which stood about 6 feet tall. The latch was small, barely big enough for a hand to fit through. As I hung the laundry, I suddenly felt an overwhelming sense of fear, paralyzing, almost suffocating. I slowly turned my head toward the gate, just in time to see a black-gloved hand pull away from the latch. The gate began to slowly creak open. I froze and whispered a quiet no. As my eyes adjusted to the darkness, I could see a black shoe halfway through the gap in the gate. I backed up toward the house, heart racing, and told the person on the other side of the gate, "I'm going to get the dog." Of course, I didn't have a dog at the time, but I figured a bluff might help. I quickly slipped inside, latched the door, and called the police. The police arrived in under 2 minutes. When I'd moved into the area, I'd made sure to establish contact with them, and they had flagged my phone number and address for immediate response in case of an emergency. They searched the area, but didn't find anyone. They believed the individual had run down a nearby laneway and disappeared. For the next month, the police patrolled the area every night. At that time, my ex-husband hadn't called our children in a week, which was unusual. 2 days later, he called and apologized, saying he hadn't been able to contact them because he had just flown back into Main City. This was strange for several reasons. He was unemployed, living off government benefits in a rural town, and had no reason to be flying, especially to that city. I didn't want to jump to conclusions, but I couldn't shake the feeling that it was him. The police share my suspicion. 2 weeks later, I was at the police station registering for an AVO, apprehended violence order, when the officers asked me to fill out a form for a security upgrade for my home. It turns out they had been investigating and uncovered that my ex-husband had booked a flight for that day, boarded the flight, and arrived in my state. They lost track of him once he landed. Even more chilling, they found messages between him and a relative on Facebook detailing his plans to kill me once he found me, including specific information, though they didn't share the full details. To this day, I can't understand why he didn't go through with his plan that night at the gate. I wonder if the fact that I was outside when he expected me to be inside threw him off, or maybe he didn't know I didn't have a dog, and that my bluff worked. The real saving grace was that I had already been flagged with the police, so they responded quickly. Since then, we've moved 2 more times. 6 years later, my ex-husband has found us again, this time because of a police breakdown in communication. But I'm done running. I refuse to keep living in fear. This is my life now, and I'm going to stand my ground. This story is a little different in that it doesn't involve anyone doing anything wrong, just nature doing what it does best. I was around 10 years old, living with my aunt and 2 younger cousins. The youngest one was barely 3. One afternoon, my aunt decided to quickly run to the store for cigarettes. The convenience store was close by, so close in fact that I could have biked there and back in under 20 minutes. It was a beautiful day, around 4:30 or 5, and we knew the neighbors well enough that we could go to them for help if anything went wrong. It seemed like a completely reasonable thing for my aunt to do. Just minutes after she left, everything changed. The sky darkened suddenly, and it looked like night had fallen in an instant. My aunt had a fan in her bedroom window upstairs, with 2 sets of blades, one for pulling air in and one for pushing it out. Out of nowhere, the fan began making an awful noise. My oldest cousin, who was about 7, and I rushed into the room, only to find both blades spinning in the same direction, overloading the motor. We struggled to lift the window and get the fan out to stop it, but just as we managed to get the window open, a massive gust of wind blew the fan into us, knocking us down. In less than 10 minutes, my aunt had left, and the entire sky had turned pitch black. Then, the rain came pouring down in sheets. That's when I heard it, the sound of a freight train. I knew exactly what was happening. I grabbed my cousins and quickly led them to the bottom of the house, where we huddled in a hallway. The sound of the storm was deafening, like a train was barreling through the house. The windows rattled, and hail slammed against the walls. We were all crying, terrified. Then my little cousin started yelling, "Mom's knocking on the door." At first, I tried to tell him it was just the hail, but he broke free from us and ran upstairs. Sure enough, it was my aunt, who had made it back and was knocking on the door. She brought him downstairs, and we all huddled together for safety. Suddenly, a massive tree branch came crashing through the living room window next to the front door. If my cousin hadn't opened the door when he did, it could have killed my aunt. The storm only lasted about 20 or 30 minutes, but in that short time, it completely devastated the area. The garage roof was torn off, and the living room was flooded with around 6 inches of hail and debris from the broken window. It was one of the scariest experiences I've ever gone through, and to this day, I still get panic attacks whenever there's a tornado warning or a bad storm. When I was about 9 years old, I went to the park near my house with my older sister, who was 17, and her boyfriend, who was around 18 or 19. My sister and her boyfriend were walking around the track, while I played on the playground by myself. It was early evening, almost dusk, so I was the only one on the playground. After a few minutes, a middle-aged man approached and started talking to me. I don't remember everything he said, but I do recall him gradually getting closer and closer. At first, he was standing at the other end of a bridge that connected to a platform I was on. But as the conversation continued, he moved closer and closer, eventually standing right by me on the platform. Just as I started to feel uncomfortable and nervous, I saw my sister and her boyfriend coming around the track. The man quickly asked if they were my parents, but since they were still a little ways off, I don't think he could tell how young they were. I told him it was my sister and her boyfriend, and he hurriedly said goodbye and left. I can't say for sure what would have happened if they hadn't come around when they did, but I'm so glad they did. This wasn't exactly creepy, but it was terrifying. I lived in China between the ages of 6 and 10, and when I was 7, I was riding the school bus home with my 5-year-old sister. We were used to seeing armed guards on the sidewalk, especially since we live in the embassy area. It wasn't uncommon to see people in regular clothes carrying weapons too. One day, as we were driving along, we suddenly heard gunshots. It was the first time I'd ever heard them, and I was completely shocked. Then there were more shots, and instinctively, I grabbed my sister and pulled her under the window, hoping the bus would somehow stop any bullets that might come our way. Just then, we heard a loud bang. Our tire had been shot. The shooting stopped after that, and we pulled over to change the tire. It turns out the police had been firing at a man who was tearing down propaganda posters. It was the most harrowing experience of my young life. The adults around me tried to explain it quickly and then moved on as if it were no big deal. But for me, I'll never forget hugging my sister and trying to protect her, thinking that if anyone was going to get hurt, it was going to be me. I work in cybersecurity, and this is one of the more unsettling and morally complex situations I've been involved in. A few years ago, I did a favor for an old friend, and during that time, ISIS had seriously stepped up their intelligence operations, particularly with the help of the Turkish government. They started collecting smartphones from the bodies of killed combatants. I wasn't aware of this at first, but about a month before I was set to head home, I found out. It turns out some simple countermeasures were put in place, and the fighting continued as usual. After finishing that assignment, I went back to my normal routine. About a year later, I got a message from a guy I'd met while I was there. He was a cool guy, a talented poet, and we had chatted a few times during my stay. We caught up a bit, and he seemed really interested in what everyone was up to. I didn't know too much about it, or I just didn't get into details about the others. A few weeks later, I had a conversation with my old friend and mentioned the guy I'd spoken to. That's when I learned something disturbing. My friend explained that the guy had been killed during the fighting, and when they tried to recover his body, it had gone missing. Apparently, ISIS had used his biometrics to unlock his phone, hoping to extract information by messaging people close to him. At the time, it was eerie to think about, and I still can't shake the thought from my mind. It was a chilling reminder of just how far intelligence operations can go and how deeply personal the stakes can get. I'm a tall, skinny female working on an ambulance. Aside from one terrifying incident with a patient who actually tried to kill me. I won't go into that story today, but trust me, it was horrifying. There's one experience that stands out as particularly creepy. I had to take a trip to the state hospital, the kind of place where the most dangerous, murderous psychiatric patients go. We had just dropped off a patient around 11 p.m., and as we were pulling out, I caught sight of an older man. He was in a straitjacket, handcuffed, ankle cuffed, and chained up with more chains wrapped around him. He was attached to an officer who was taking him on a midnight stroll. I just remember thinking, what the hell? It was unsettling, to say the least. Then there was the time I picked up a federal inmate to take him to the ER. As we were heading there, the correctional officer pulled me aside, showed me something on his phone, and asked, "Does this guy look familiar?" It was an article about the inmate, this murderer who had killed in several major cities, stolen millions from the drug trade, and had a huge arsenal of weapons. At first, I didn't make the connection, but after a moment, I realized the article was about the very person I'd just been in close proximity to. What freaked me out even more was how polite and respectful he was toward me the whole time. It was totally surreal. When I was 20, I was visiting my neighbor to help with a project when his 3-year-old daughter came running around the corner, bleeding heavily from the back of her head. She had fallen off her kiddie swing and struck her head on a rock. Her parents rushed to wrap up the wound and get her into the car, while I immediately called 911, giving them all the details, the nature of the injury, the hospital they were headed to, and even a make and model of their car, so the police would understand why they were speeding. I still get chills when I think about it. There was so much blood. It's a helpless feeling, that sinking realization that despite everything, there's nothing you can do when someone is hurt so badly. I wouldn't exactly call it creepy, but it was definitely horrifying. Sometime during the night, my car was stolen and involved in a failure to stop incident. There was a police chase and the driver bailed out, all while I was sound asleep in my bed. The police eventually found my abandoned car and ran the plates, which led them straight to my house. I woke up to a cop with a gun drawn, pointing it right at me, shouting orders. Meanwhile, 2 other officers had gone upstairs to do the same with my kids, who were 12, 15, and 18 at the time. I was completely confused, having no idea what was going on. My kids and I were jolted awake by cops searching for a suspect who had stolen my car. They had a description of the driver and were convinced that I was hiding him somewhere in the house. To make sure, they called in the fire department to run heat signature scans through the walls and attic, checking for any signs of the fugitive. The good news is that my car was recovered in one piece and none of us were arrested or cuffed. But just imagine waking up to a 9mm pistol pointed at you. In 9th grade, my friend fell from a hill, and as I rushed to get to him, I tripped and dislocated my shoulder. Sadly, he hit his head and passed away, which was absolutely horrifying. The worst beating I ever got from my dad was when he used the TV cable, which was terrifying, especially considering I was only about 10 at the time. As I got older, I had 2 near-death experiences. One was when my car's brakes failed, and I ended up drifting until I used the curb to stop the car. The other was a shooting where one of the bullets missed my head by just inches. Neither of those felt all that terrifying to me, but my friends certainly thought they were. I guess I've become pretty numb to bad things happening by now. When I was 19, my parents' divorce was chaotic and violent. There were moments when my mother pushed my father and he collapsed. At one point, She almost ran to his job in anger, but my father woke up and threatened her with a knife. It was a terrifying scene, but I fought back with him, much like in a tense scene for Breaking Bad. I ended up scratched, but my mother managed to escape. That was the most horrifying experience of my life. After that, my mother never saw my father again. He passed away 6 months ago, and I know I should see a therapist to help process everything. My grandmother and I grabbed some fast food for dinner and started heading back to our neighborhood, which was about 10 miles away. The drive involved getting on and off the freeway, and as we were driving, I noticed something odd. The car behind us looked exactly like the one that had been behind us in the drive-thru. And then it started making all the same turns we were. At first, we thought it might just be a coincidence, maybe a fellow neighbor who had also grabbed Wendy's for dinner. But when they turned onto our specific street, we both knew something was off. Without hesitation, we kept driving, taking a detour out of the neighborhood and back onto the freeway, heading toward the local police station. For the next 15 miles or so, they followed us, switching lanes to stay behind us no matter what. Eventually, they abruptly cut across 3 lanes of traffic and took an off-ramp, speeding away from us. As relieved as we were, it was about then that we realized we were running dangerously low on gas. Our best guess was that these people had spotted my grandmother, a woman with a handicap license plate, picking up food, and saw her as an easy target for something like a home invasion or even a kidnapping. It's a good thing we stayed alert and didn't wait around to find out. My parents told me they'd be home in 30 minutes, but I later found out they were actually 2 hours away. About 35 minutes later, someone knocked on the door, and without thinking, I just opened it. They didn't waste any time. They shoved the door open, but luckily I had forgotten to latch it. It was a woman and a really intimidating guy. I managed to slam the door shut and lock the deadbolt just in time. They started yelling at me, claiming they needed to use my phone immediately because her kids had been abducted. I quickly called the cops, but the woman insisted I go outside and let her use the phone. Luckily, I lived less than a minute away from the police station. Within a minute, I saw 4 cop cars pull up outside. It turns out the guy had a weapon and was trying to force his way into the house. It was seriously scary. Living so close to the police station has definitely saved my skin more than once. Another time, 2 guys were trying to break in through the back window. I called the cops again, and I swear it was barely a minute before I saw flashlights in the yard. They ended up calling in a helicopter because the guys had jumped over a few fences trying to escape. I was living alone on a quiet back street in a larger city when one night I was in bed and suddenly heard a woman screaming outside. This wasn't just a regular scream, but a raw, gut-wrenching scream, like she was terrified for her life. It happened a couple of times, and I got up to look out the window. I was on the 5th floor of a large apartment building, so I had a good view of the street. I glanced around to see if anyone else was looking out of their windows, but nothing. Then the scream came again, and it sounded like it was directly beneath my window. There was a small enclosed car parked down there, but it was dark. I shone my phone's flashlight down, but I couldn't see anything. I thought about calling the police, but before I could decide, the scream came again, even louder this time. Without thinking, I rushed downstairs. Almost immediately, I regretted it, but I kept going, my heart pounding. I crept around to the back of the building, where the sound seemed to be coming from. And then the scream echoed again, blood-curdling, spine-chilling. I shouted "Hey" as loud and forcefully as I could, hoping to make myself sound intimidating. But there was no response. I was frozen with fear, adrenaline coursing through me, my hands shaking. I couldn't see anything, so I turned on my phone's flashlight and scanned the area. Still nothing. Then, out of nowhere, 2 foxes darted out from behind one of the cars. They scampered off down the street, and I let out a huge sigh of relief, thinking it can't have been that. I stood there for a moment, still shaken, then went back up to my apartment. As soon as I was inside, I Googled the sound, and sure enough, it was foxes. Apparently, the sounds they make when fighting or whatever they were doing sound eerily like witches screaming or people being burned at the stake. It was absolutely horrifying to hear, especially when you don't know what it is in the middle of the night. When my brother was 16, my dad reacted violently to something small. Apparently, my brother sighed or rolled his eyes when my dad told him to close a window, just typical teenage behavior. My stepmom and I watched in horror as he forced his way into my brother's room. I tried to intervene, to stop him, but he just shoved me aside. The look in his eyes was pure, unadulterated rage. From the hallway, we heard him beating my brother, the sickening thuds of him being slammed against the wall and punched. Afterward, my dad came into my room and yelled at me for trying to stop him. I remember him saying something chilling like, "When I'm dealing with them, it's between me and them. Don't you ever get involved." My youngest sister, who was only 3 or 4 at the time, just stood in the hallway outside my brother's room, crying, wanting to see him. My stepmom and I couldn't get her to move. Eventually, my brother came out of his room and held her, trying to comfort her. The truly disturbing thing is that this wasn't the first time I had witnessed my dad being violent with someone. But it was the incident that terrified me the most because up until that point, he had never directed that kind of violence towards any of his own children. If you made it to the end of the video, thanks for watching. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and share, and we will see you in the next video.